when you get into my office by that point, most of the time, not all couples are like this, but many couples, there's a primary earner and there's a person who raised the children. And that person who raised the children has a master's degree, had a career, was on track to be at the same level as the other spouse. And typically it's the female. And when the husband says, well, we decided you would stay home with the kids, Dr. Burke, let me tell you something. If you want to run for cover, put on a helmet because I know exactly what's coming out of that wife's mouth. We didn't decide this. You decided it.
Welcome to the Family Dialogues podcast. Most couples don't fall apart because they stop loving each other. They fall apart because they never learn how to negotiate with the person they love the most. What if the real skill that keeps a marriage or a family intact isn't passion or shared history, but the ability to turn conflict into cooperation through negotiation? Today, we're exploring exactly that with Joe Dillon, a divorce mediator who spent nearly 20 years helping couples negotiate their way through dissolution and realize that the couples who struggle the most fail not for lack of love, but for lack of negotiation skills. Joe is a co-founder of Equitable Mediation Services. He holds an MBA in finance and trained at Harvard and Northwestern, known for his Power Up method, a 7-step framework that helps couples stop arguing and start negotiating. His upcoming book, Every Marriage is a Negotiation, reflects his core insight. Most couples know how to argue, but few know how to negotiate. His firm has a 98% case resolution rate, and his work has been featured in Forbes, Business Insider, Newsweek, and Huffington Post, with his mediation blog reaching over 1 million readers. Joe, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Burke. And I'm not really sure who you were talking about there. I'd like to meet that guy. He seems like a good guy.
I'm speaking to him. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh gosh. For those of us who are from divorced parents, or maybe some listeners who are separated or divorced, they know the challenge of just trying to cooperate or communicate as they go through separating legally and assets and etc. But even before that, a lot of parents or couples struggle within a marriage long before they decide to give up. And it's usually a communication issue. So even though you're a divorce mediator, I think it is wonderful to talk to you so that couples who are currently struggling can know the patterns that you've seen over the years so that they can do an inventory of their marriage and themselves to ensure that they can make changes for the betterment of the relationship and also the family. So to start the conversation, while I was preparing for this interview, I noticed you had a personal story of your parents getting divorced and what that did to you. So can you share with their audience what happened in that courtroom when I think you were 16? With your parents?
Yeah, certainly. So my parents litigated their divorce. So each of them hired attorneys and it dragged on through the court system. And my mom thought it would be a good idea for me to sit in the back of the courtroom because then the judge would see me and she thought that would favor her. And quite frankly, that sometimes works. And my mom was a single mom and I'm an only child. So there was a whole thought process, I guess she put into her head. But more importantly, what was happening was they were just simply arguing. And now they both had their lawyers and the judge was up there on the bench. And the two of them are just sort of like yelling at each other across the courtroom. And I'm watching this unfold and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a teenager and even I know something is wrong here. And if I know something's wrong, we have a big problem on our hands. So as I moved throughout my life and into my career as a divorce mediator, that became my goal, is to help people peacefully end their marriages rather than try to blow the whole thing up like my parents did. But it goes deeper than that because growing up, I watched how my parents simply didn't know how to communicate with each other. And I witnessed that the same arguments would happen over and over and over. And as I sit back as a mediator and looking back at 30 years of negotiation, you say to yourself, there's definitely patterns that develop. And one of the things that I hope we have a chance to talk about today is what I've called the I've decided pattern. And that's probably one of the most dangerous things you can have in a marriage where you're acting as a solopreneur. And you kind of forget that now that you're married, there's another individual. And if there's kids involved, even more individuals who are also in the midst of this decision. And we all perhaps recall, whether we recall them positively or not so positively, of our bachelorhood or bachelorette days where we could sleep till whatever we want. We could eat where we wanted. We could buy what we wanted. When you get married, all of a sudden, and I'm an only child, so it's even more acute for me, is the brakes get put on that. And now you've got to consider this other person. And that's part of what I'm trying to now explain to couples, that to treat your marriage, it's a partnership. And that partnership requires decision making, and it requires you to cooperate in doing that and to give you a structured way to have those conversations and make those decisions.
Yeah, as you were speaking just now, I was smiling to myself because I'm also an only child, so I know what it's like. And it's the,
You do.
switching from I to we.
Right.
A lot of couples don't seem to get there. And
Right.
sometimes you think you're communicating the same thing. So even though it's English and it's completely different meaning for both persons,
Exactly.
and,
Exactly.
background, your history, all of that influence your interpretation of what is being said. So
Mm,
it's wonderful for us to just dive into that now, because you said there's a clear distinction between arguing and negotiating. So
yes.
what is that distinction, and why is it so crucial for couples to understand that? And
Yeah.
why is it that people get them so mixed up?
Sure. That's a great question. Arguing, there's a couple of things that arguing has, to define arguing. Number one, it's self-focused. So I've got a point. I want something, me, and I'm going to just get what I want. The heck with anybody else. The other thing that arguing, in my experience, has is emotion, escalation. There's there's real force behind those words, and sometimes those words may not come across as kind. They may not even come across as accurate. How many times have we been in an argument with someone? One of my favorite lines is, "You never pick up your clothes." Really? I'm 57. In 57 years, I have never once picked my coat up off the floor, right? Those things where we smile because we're not in the middle of it. But when you're in it, it's taking over, right? So it's sort of inwardly focused, and it's using emotional words. And perhaps some of those are not even accurate. Negotiation, the opposite. It's now we focused. It's you and me. We are in this. What's best for us? And it's also a phrase I like to use. I call it detached engagement. I view myself, whenever I have a conversation with my wife, or even when I'm in my mediation practice, it's not that I don't care. I care deeply. And I just picture myself as I'm floating. I'm floating above the conversation with my wife and I. And I'm this observer, and I'm just looking at it, and I'm saying, okay, no judgment here. What's happening right now in this moment? That takes practice. It really does. I'm not going to say it's easy. But when you detach yourself, knowing that I'm still engaged, I still care, I still want this to work out, but I'm going to drive with my head, and instead of with my anger and my emotions, that helps the conversation go a lot better. So you can see the difference. It's me versus we, and it's solutions oriented versus emotions oriented, if you will. And that is something, Dr. Burke, that I wish was taught the day you were married. It would solve a lot of our issues that we have as couples, because we would recognize suddenly, as you and I were joking, as only children, somebody needs to sit us down and go, guess what? Even if you weren't an only child, it's no longer all about you. And you need to be okay with that, because I don't think a lot of us are.
Yeah, it's really hard for a lot of people to go into that detached engagement, as you mentioned, and to focus
Hmm.
on we and finding a solution together. Because when you're in fight flight mode, you're in a survival thing. Like, I need to survive. I need to be the one to win. I
Right.
know I am right. You're just not seeing the point of view,
Right. Yeah.
not trying to see the other person's perspective, but you want the other
Hmm.
person to see your perspective. This detached engagement, I
Yeah.
want you to get into that a little bit, because when we're arguing or trying to negotiate with our loved ones or partners, the emotions can get so raw
Mhm.
that how do you begin to practice this detached engagement?
Yeah. So the very first thing that you do or I do is I always remember that no matter how mad I am at this person or upset or emotional at this point in time, that for one reason or another, I'm talking about my spouse now, for one reason or another, this person chose me and I chose them. So out of the, I don't know how many billions of people there are on the planet now, 8 billion, 9 billion, right? But somehow the two of us found our way to each other and we both made a conscious choice to say, I want to be with you. So I'm always going in on the supposition that this person has my best interests in mind, and therefore I need to do the same for them. Even though it might not be apparent at the time, that's my position. And if I remember that and I'm looking at that individual, I'm not thinking they're malicious, they're harmful, they're out to get me. I need to protect myself. Now, granted, unfortunately, in our lines of work, we've seen cases like domestic violence. We've seen emotional manipulation, financial manipulation. It's out there, it's real. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about regular folks like us in our everyday situations where we run across we have a little scuttle with our spouse. How do we get past that? And that's the one thing I'm always looking at my spouse and reminding her, and she's reminding me that we are a team and we have each other's best interests in mind. That's how you do it.
Yeah, I really love that. I don't like this person right now,
Right.
but I don't like how they're communicating.
Right.
But despite all of this mess, they have my best interest in mind. If
Mm.
we can
Yeah.
just be grounded in that, okay, the
Right.
current situation is horrible. We don't like each other. We just think it's not going to work or whatever the case is. But just to remember, we chose each other to begin with. And I
Right.
guess trying to be grounded from that beginning point, and this person has my best interest in mind.
Absolutely.
That's a really good thing to help couples to be grounded
Yeah.
when they feel or they assume that everything is falling apart. So,
Right.
can you share with the audience what a typical argument looks like versus a negotiation, and how does one impact the relationship over time? So how,
Yeah. Happy to. So a good example I use, and this will be, I'll just come at it from the male perspective, is the guy's weekend, right? You want to go away with your buddies for the weekend. And that's a hard sell for a number of reasons. Okay. Yeah. Could be financial. It could be, wait, what? You're leaving me all alone for 4 days with these kids? It could be, God only knows what trouble you're going to get into because I know your friends and I don't trust them, right? It could be a myriad of things. So part of the things that lead to these kinds of arguments and where the negotiations fail, there's a couple of things. And I have this power up method that I use with couples and that's what I'm writing the book about. And the first step that you get it into, and this is what I say as a professional negotiator, this is what separates the professionals from the amateurs. It's the letter U in the power up, which is weigh their perspective. So, what do we do when we're arguing, right? Think about it. An argument typically consists of two people who are waiting for their turn to talk. They're not really listening, are they? They're just going, when is this person going to stop talking so that I can speak my mind?
or you have a
So
rebuttal too.
exactly. And you might not even wait for them to stop speaking, by the way. You might just cut them off, right? So when you start with the letter, when you think of the letter W and weighing their perspective, rather than sharing your want, your need, your perspective, you share theirs first. You say what they are thinking. Now, that does require you to, I hopefully you know your spouse well enough to know what these objections might be, and also for you to do a little homework. So I'll go on with my guy's weekend example. I might come up to my wife and say, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something. I would like to plan a trip away with my friends." So that's what we call outline your request. That's just I'm giving you the 50,000-foot view. Let's just look at it high. Okay. Oh yeah. What is it? Now, instead of saying what you want, your first move is to say, "Listen, I know Jake has a gambling problem, and I know that the kids are a handful, and I realize that 4 days away and leaving you alone with a 6 and a 4 year old is a lot to ask. So see what I've done there? I've already deflated the balloon. I've taken the air out of your argument and now the person's like, huh, well, okay. He knows how big this ask is going to be, right? So he's not a total knucklehead. He's kind of like, okay, I'm listening. I really would like to plan a trip with my friends. And then the E in the power is express your why. It's not because you always go away with your girlfriends and I never get to go anywhere, blah, 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 right? You're not a 5-year-old, right? We're an adult. In my example, it might be, you know, Tyler just lost his job and, Bobby's just has a 6 month old. And it just really seemed like we haven't gotten to spend a lot of time with each other lately because life has really gotten in the way. And I miss hanging out with my friends. And I know when I go away, it lets me be a guy. And then I come back a better father and husband. So you hear that, right? That's a real reason someone can hook onto, not just because like a little kid with a cookie, I want it, me, me. It's, I know what your objections are going to be. There's your W, and I want to express my why. Here's a real reason why I want to go. And that's part of this whole conversations. And when you're having, whether it's about whose family you're going to go to for the holiday or this trip, or should we relocate for this new job, this structure works all the time, no matter what the decision is, because it's organized, it's got guardrails, and immediately, when you're asking for something, we always forget this. Our spouse has no reason to really give it to us, do they? They, by decree, have chosen to like legally bind themselves to us, right? The romantic in me, Dr. Burke. But it's really the person that you have to say, I'm still asking for something that I want. And in fact, they're going to get nothing out of it. They're going to be stuck home with 2 kids, alone for 4 days. I know how we have a dog. Our dog has to go in and out she wants to go in and out every 5 seconds. They're going to just be out of their minds. So we then finish off with the letter R, which is the power, and that's reward with value. And so to that, it now says, I know I'm asking for something big, and I'm going to reward you with something big in return. Not, hey, you know what? When I get back, I'll pick up a pizza. Who cares, right? When I get back, we're going to open up the calendar and you are going to find a 4-day weekend to go to that spa you've been talking about for 6 months with your girlfriends. And I'll drive you all to the airport and pick you back up. I'll take care of the kids. I'll walk the dogs. You go have a great time. So you see, that reward is on par with my ask. So now the person you're talking to, you've taken away their objections. You've given them a reason to say yes. And you've thrown in a sweetener, a reward that says, I know how big this ask is. I now want to offer you something of equal value. All right. So that is kind of the first part of that power, and the power up. And it works really well because what the person feels seen, they feel heard. And isn't that something, right? That's all we want. We just want to be understood. We want to be acknowledged and validated. And the world isn't set up that way. The world is set up to kind of tell us what to do and to stomp on us. And who cares if we get what we want, right? But this is a way of you saying, look, I see you. I hear you. I know what the challenges are for you. This is really what I need. I really want to reward you for giving me that. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it also shows that you are thinking of your spouse and how they view the perspective. And you have a certain level of self-awareness to know that this ask is going to just really be difficult for them, as your example, the 4 days. But at
Hmm.
least you can say, I'm willing to reciprocate, because I think that's the part that's missing for a lot of people. This is what I want. I want to go away with
Right.
my friends. I want to do
Right.
this. And the other partner is just left stressed out, burnt out,
Yeah.
tired.
Yep.
And that's where resentment comes. That's where anger comes and all of that. And you're like, I don't know why you're angry all the time, kind of thing. And not
Right.
realizing you're not reciprocating. You're not saying, okay, I have been able to do the things I like. Let me take it on. And I think this is probably a more a problem for men, I think, than women to
100%.
to
Yeah.
think that, okay, she's giving me this opportunity. I know being with the kids for 4 days is tough. It's going to be tough for me too, but I have to reciprocate something that is as valuable as my 4 days. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. It's a big deal. And you're right. It is a male problem a majority of the time. And it results in the wife saying, you never listen. You don't understand.
you're
That's
selfish.
those are true statements because what do you mean? I took the dog out last Saturday. The
That's not
dog
the
goes out
same.
7 times a day. You took the
Yeah, it's not the
dog out
same
once.
value. Right.
Yeah, there's not.
Values. So you have to think that I want to do these things, but I also have to reciprocate by creating a reward with the value, not just, okay, the normal things you do around the house, you just continue to do them. You do them regardless, even if you didn't go on a trip,
Exactly. Yep.
right? So you have to
Exactly.
an
Yeah.
extra mile for that request. You've said that most divorces aren't caused by a sudden crisis, but by years of small negotiations that went badly or
Yeah.
never happened. What are some
Yep.
of those everyday examples of these critical small negotiations that you've seen over your 2+ decades of interacting with people who end up coming to you because they're just
Yeah.
at their wits' end and saying, this marriage is not working, we're done.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of patterns. One is finances. As you would imagine, money is a very difficult subject for people. And to not sit down at the very beginning of your marriage and have a conversation about spending styles and saving styles, and then just letting it over time fade. And someone comes home with a new wardrobe or a new motorcycle or a dot, 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 right? I decided I was worth it. Wanted this, me, I. And that can really create a lot of rifts. And at first, when we're newlyweds, we let a lot slide. We say, well, you know what? He's the guy, he still thinks he's 20. Okay, let him have a stupid motorcycle. But the minute he's not looking, that thing's going up for sale and and they want to, but that's one where you sit down and you don't talk about money. Another big one is kids. I have to tell you, this is one of those classic, if I had $1 for every time I heard this line, I'd be a millionaire. And it's the decision to have children and who will raise them. When you get into my office by that point, most of the time, not all couples are like this, but many couples, there's a primary earner and there's a person who raised the children. And that person who raised the children has a master's degree, had a career, was on track to be at the same level as the other spouse. And typically it's the female. And when the husband says, well, we decided you would stay home with the kids, Dr. Burke, let me tell you something. If you want to run for cover, put on a helmet because I know exactly what's coming out of that wife's mouth. We didn't decide this.
You.
You decided it. That's when I get my dollar. That's the line that gets me the dollar. And it's like because they didn't treat each other as a team. They didn't say, look, I think you would be more adept to raise the kids as newborns because they tend to be more attached to their mother. However, when they're both in school, if you want me to stay be around, we can swap places. You can then pursue your career, or when they're old enough, I'm going to pay for you to go back to school and level up your training again. And then we're going to get a babysitter or have your mom live with us so that you can continue to pursue your career. That's that rewarding with value. I'm asking this big thing of you to stop, to, basically walk away from your career for a period of time. And then I want to reward that by expressing why I think it's important. Kids really need their moms. And then rewarding you by saying, I'll do everything I can to get you back up to speed. So that's the methodology, even in that case. So you get the money, you get the kids, And then, of course, the career, which is tied into that. What I've been seeing a lot of lately are men who are a bit lost and they're in their 50s and they have a dream that they're going to, get their Westphalia and drive around the country and, go camp by the riverbed and, and live off the land or hunt for berries in the woods. I don't know. And the wife is like, we have two kids in college and we have a house and we have retirement and how do you think that's going to happen? And that's because in this example, these guys actually just quit their jobs. They literally just come home one day and say, that's beneath me. I'm better than fill in the blank, that company, that job. And the wife is like, I'm sorry, what? You know, because as we all know, right, no matter where you live here, America, Europe, it's very expensive now. And gone are the days that when I was growing up where one parent could work and we still lived a very nice middle existence. We had a house, weren't fancy, but we always had a new car every 5, 10 years. And we could buy groceries and we could go on vacation once a year. And now it really does take two incomes to even tread water. And so that's another pattern. And what you've noticed in all of those is I've decided I did this unilaterally without involving you in the decision. And sometimes it happens abruptly, like in the case I've quit my job. Sometimes it was a long time ago, like the kids. And then sometimes it's just little things that happen over time that we're always going to your families for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever it is. And so that pattern shows up in a myriad of ways.
Yeah. I want to go back to the kids because I'm looking at this is a difference in values.
Hmm.
And some parents might be listening and thinking, we never really talked about our values and we're now married already. It's not like we're
Yeah,
dating and we can then start a
right.
conversation.
Yeah.
How have you helped couples to resolve this? Because again, you might have a very independent woman
Yeah,
and then she marries a very traditional man.
yeah,
Without kids, they're fine.
yeah,
And then once the kids show up, that difference in value system clash hardcore. Have you been
yes.
able to help couples work their way through those differences and how?
Yeah. So exactly. And that what we do is when we're working on kind of the power up side, not the divorce side, the philosophy is the same as it is in negotiation. And we have in negotiation, without getting a little too deep into it, because you could spend a lifetime studying this, there's two schools of thought in a negotiation. There's what we call positional. So that's what we were talking about before. I want this. And they're close-ended, finite things. Like I want $10. That's positional. The other way negotiators like myself look at it as is interest based. I'm saying, well, why does this person want $10? Let me see if I can get to the root of what this ask is all about. And maybe this person wants to go to the movies or wants to buy a sandwich or something. And so their interest is really they're hungry or they want to be entertained. It's not the $10. And it might not even be the movie or the sandwich. It's they're hungry or bored. And so that's the approach we use when we get these kinds of conflicts where we say, look, really what's your shared interest here? If you've got something in this example, I'll use this with the kids and the couple. I'll say, it sounds like you both have an interest in providing your kids the best life and opportunity for success. So how do we do that? Notice the question, how? Notice we, even though they're not my kids, right? They're not but how do we, the three of us, do that? Well, let's talk. Let's us talk, right? So now it's a shared problem to solve. And when you've got a situation like that, the approach is no bad ideas. Let's just start throwing things out on the table. What would make it so that you felt, call it out as you hear it, as you need to, you felt that your kids lived a comfortable, well taken care of, successful lifestyle as children. And they say that they have enough money to do this. Yes. That they have a good education. Yes. Oh, great, great. And I'm encouraging them, right? We're encouraging. Sounds great. Wow. It sounds like you really both want the best for them. See, now I've connected them, right? So now it's not you versus me. It's you both. yeah, wow, you guys are great parents, plural, right? So we're connecting them now and they're going, hey, we are on the same team. We're not on opposite sides of this. We both do want the best. And so great. How can we get that for the kids? It sounds like to you, spouse one, it's really important that they're raised by a family member or have interfacing, interactions with their parents. For you, it sounds really important that they have the money that they need to enjoy leisure activities and whatever it is. And so, how can we make that happen? And then you'll bring both parties into the other side a little bit. Can you see how the other person might find it important that you stay home? Can you see why it's important the other person might want to go back to work? And from there, now that we've gotten that, this is the question. And when we're talking about ask, right, and with reward with value, this is just another way to do it, is to say to the person, let's assume it's the gentleman who wants his wife to stay home. Okay, sir, what is it, if your wife agrees to stay home, what is it that you're willing to offer her in order for her to agree to do that? And at that moment, we usually have a lot of silence. They're not thinking about what the other I could offer the other person. They're thinking about what I want. I want you to stay home. Well, they don't want to stay home, sir. Well, then are we getting a divorce here? Like, should like, what are we doing here? And that's usually where it gets some mumbling and grumbling. And I say, okay, well, let's try some things on. And then you turn to the other person and say, okay, if you were to stay home, Mrs., what is it that you would need in exchange to do that? I would need a written guarantee, Joe, that in 5 years I can return to the workforce, and we would put aside money for me to pursue a master's in counseling because I've always wanted to go into private practice. Okay, mister, how does that sound? Is that agreeable to you? And then you can see, right, go back and forth. But it's the same application. It's the same, you're asking, so now you also need a reward with value. That's always the piece that's missing. And that's the piece we try and get people to think about.
From what you're saying, what I'm hearing is couples have to be willing to have those very difficult business-like conversations. It's not
Yeah,
just we love each other and love will
right.
suffice and whatever. It's to
Yeah.
really get down into the nitty-gritty of looking realistically on what the other person needs and wants and what you need and want and how you can find a way in the middle that both are happy. Can a couple
Yeah.
do this by themselves? And if they can, what kind of personality have you seen a couple who is able to do this by themselves without getting emotions all entangled into it?
Yeah, you're going to get emotions. There's no question because you're passionate about what it is. I feel like if you follow the framework, the power up framework, that if you look at it, and I joke, right? I'm in the middle of writing this book, and I've joked about it. If I should write two versions of it, one aimed at men and one aimed at women, I should say approach conversations. My wife and I are the same way. Approach conversations far differently, but I'm trying to make it universal for everyone, for all aspects. But the whole thing is to recognize that when we got married, and even for people who have children, my wife and I, we always marvel at this. You may get some advice from your parents. You might read a book. Yeah, maybe there's an article you read online about how to be a good spouse or whatever it is. But nobody ever really sat you down and said, there's going to be a lot that goes wrong. There's going to be a lot that you disagree with. There's going to be a lot of hurdles that you have to jump over. And here's a structured way to do that. Because we all focus on, as you just said, Dr. Burke, like we all focus on the love and the romance. And I'm married 21 years now, and my life is less romance. There's still, of course, romance and more, oh, great, the dog threw up on the carpet, or oh my gosh, I have to take out the garbage because they're coming to pick the rubbish bins up tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. There's more of that than there is the other stuff. And to keep the household and the relationship running, you need to be somewhat of a taskmaster and it needs to be somewhat tactical. Well, I'm saying also apply that same mindset to important conversations. Let's remove some of those emotions, apply a more structured approach. And it literally, I have like a one pager that when I do seminars, I've just spoken to groups before, and it's like, here, just just take this one page and put it up on your refrigerator and just look at the steps and follow along. And my wife and I, we we almost we almost make a joke out of it, which makes it fun. And we take it so seriously that it becomes funny. I'll be like, "Excuse me, Cheryl, may I speak to you when you have a moment?" And I'll make a face, and she'll be like, "Why, yes, Joe. What is it that you would like to discuss?" And we know that we're being way over the top, but then it kind of adds some levity to it, right? Because you know that this conversation that's coming isn't just, "Hey, can you drive me to the car repair shop on Friday?" Sure. It's not that level conversation. It's something's coming your way and I'm trying to prepare you. And that's where that outline, the request comes in because you want to telegraph. You don't want this to be a surprise. The one thing that when you asked about can couples do this, we actually didn't talk about the first P in Power Up, which is prepare the connection. That to me is where all these conversations fall down. So, Dr. Burke, you're a professional, you're doing your podcast, you're teaching, you're working, you've got your family, you've got your friends, you've got your, individual pursuits. You've got a busy day. I do as well. And to then now carve out time for a serious conversation amidst all else that I have to do is a pretty big ask. And a lot of us, what we do is because we're harried and stressed and our partner is harried and stressed, we just find that moment when it's convenient for us. It could be when, you're emptying out the rubbish bin or you're reaching into the machine and pulling out your wash. And these are not great times to have these conversations. They need a moment. And so the P is prepare the connection. It's, hey, do you have a minute? I'd like to talk to you about something. Pick whatever phrase you want. And it's not the kind of attention where, and I'll, for comedic effect, I've got my phone. Yeah, sure. What is it you want to talk to me about? Right. It's not that attention. It's sure. Would you like to talk about? It's engagement because if you don't have that, you've already lost. Conversation's over before it started. So these days, that to me is the big difficulty is finding the time to carve that out, not just in passing, but to say, hey, I really need to talk to you about something. And be honest, not a minute. Do you have a half hour? Do you have 10 minutes? Do you have an hour? Be realistic about what you're asking for because I have a minute. Then somebody could go, "Oh yeah, I have a minute. I'm just waiting for the clothes to come out of the wash." But when that buzzer beeps, I have to go. It's going to be 2 minutes. No, I'm really looking for more engagement with you, and I'm going to be honest about that. So that first P, that prepare the connection, is really where we set the tone. And then if you do that right, then yes, a couple can do this by themselves. If they don't, you're just chasing after each other and you're just yelling, talking at each other, and it's not going to go well. So,
Yeah. Earlier, you said that nobody teaches us that a lot of things are just not going to work in the marriage. And then you'll have to go through a lot of conversation and brainstorming and so on. So how do small failed negotiations accumulate and eventually lead to a breakdown that feels so sudden to the spouses? Because
yeah,
I guess you're so busy with kids, work, and life, but then there's a
yeah,
little failed negotiation. And they're so
sure.
insidious because they're so small, they're not in your face. And then
Right.
one day you wake up and you're like, why am I with this person?
Yeah, yeah, because I truly believe in the power of the mental scorecard, as I call it.
Huh.
We might not be keeping score. We're not coming up to you and say, I want to talk to you about an hour ago where you used the hanger that I normally put my coat on, and I didn't appreciate that. It's all the micro moments. And in the moment, they don't rise to the level of consciousness because they're generally unimportant. But eventually, that mental scorecard, it's keeping track. And there does come a tipping point, and all of our tipping points are different. We have to acknowledge that. But when we reach and that vessel is full and that overflows, that's when the hammer comes down. And that's why, in my experience, it's such a shock to one of the spouses that the other one wants a divorce because typically here in the United States, I can tell this as a statistic, 70% of all divorces are filed by women. 70.
And
So
I've seen anecdotal situations where the men feel like, how could I not have seen this coming? So
blindsided,
again,
right?
the two separate perspectives, you're just living in two separate
Yep.
worlds.
Yep. And the wife's been keeping that scorecard. Her threshold is high, but that husband has been filling that particular bucket quite a bit, right? Because he's just off doing his thing. And I'm not, I'm a guy, so I get to say that, not in tune, not all the time, but 30% of the guys are, 70% aren't. And that's what happens where the bucket's getting filled, the scorecards ding, 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 and eventually the explosion happens. And a lot of times, and again, I think this is a big mistake is that in my experience, women don't want to come across as nagging, as bothering, as speaking up. And that to me is like, oh, heck no. Like I'm a only child and I was raised by my mom and my Italian grandmother. So trust me, I have they're fiercely independent women. I've got that streak. I know what it's like to be raised around two women. My wife is a very independent person. So that's why I love her and I gravitate towards her. And we're both very strong-willed people. So that in that case works. But if she wasn't as strong-willed as she is, I could probably be getting away with a lot. And then eventually she'd snap and want a divorce, and I'd be like, well, what happened? Why didn't you bring this up? Because I think societally, women are kind of more taught to not necessarily speak up, which is a tremendous mistake. And in my opinion, and it does a disservice to the relationship. And so if it's not a nagging, whereas it's more of a structured conversation, and let's be honest, a structured conversation probably plays better in a guy's brain than a woman's brain. But I do think that when you're thinking about your audience, right? And I've worked with thousands of people, no two divorces are alike. So I'm constantly trying to figure out what kind of personalities and what types I've got. And I need to, on the fly in that moment, need to be able to speak to that individual and that couple. And they're all different. So I happen to have that skill because, decades of practice, but not everyone does. So if there's some structure to it and some methodology in some way, that can help have these conversations. Women can appeal to men's perhaps analytical structured side. And men can also appeal to women's nurturing side, even though it's coming across as structured. It's that rewarding with value. It's that weighing their perspective. It's saying, I hear you, I see you, I care about you, which even though you're doing it in a process oriented way, that's what my wife's like. She goes, I'll take it. Right. She's like, I'll take the win, but I don't care how you got there. And I'm like, good job. And she's like, good job, hon. I was like, all right, yay, yay me.
I can see how this definitely eliminates resentment. And I think a lot of women are just stewing in resentment because
Yeah.
they might feel they're carrying all the mental load, they're doing all the caregiving, they're doing all the housework and everything.
Mhm.
And he just seems to just be smoothing through life, just going through
Yeah.
life and everything is fine. So I see how this power up method can really help couples to get what they have bothering them out on the table to really, really do the work of finding that middle ground where they are giving reward or
Yeah.
reward with value
Right.
for the thing that they want and vice versa. So that's a really good thing. You believe that negotiation is not a trait, like a personality trait, but something that has to be trained. So for couples who might be listening and like, yeah, sounds good, but listen, we're 15 years in and we have been arguing for 15 whole years. I don't see how we can move to negotiation.
Mhm.
Can you explain to a couple who might be feeling stuck like that it can be trained and you can move from arguing
Yeah.
state to negotiation no matter how long you've been together?
Yeah, certainly. Think back to your childhood. And when we first entered our respective school systems, we didn't know how to read. We didn't know how to write, maybe a little bit, right? We didn't understand mathematics, literature, history. But over a period of a long period of time, here in the United States, our primary schools, 13 years basically, we are taught these things and we learn these things because we're open to learning them. We have an instructor who's providing it to us in an organized fashion. They're reinforcing it with homework. They're reinforcing it with lessons. And we're willing to absorb that knowledge because we know that we're going to grow and be better for it. And for couples who are listening to them, I would say two things. And forgive me because the first one is going to sound very crass, but divorce is expensive emotionally, financially, familial, children, on yourself. Even if I have a very amicable, friendly couple who are both going through it, there's still devastation on the other side of it because it's disappointment, it's loss, it's heartache, it's anger, it's all kinds of things.
And can I
And
add something to that too?
yeah, go ahead.
People think about that, but it's like I think it's 70% of the family's wealth is gone. And a big
Yeah,
chunk of that goes to the lawyers.
yeah, exactly. It's
So
very expensive.
it's not just the loss of the family, the connection of the family.
Hmm.
It's all that wealth that has been accumulated that can support the next generation to launch comfortably.
Right,
That's
right.
going to the lawyer's family.
Exactly. And that's a great line, Dr. Burke. When I get clients, I go, would you rather put your kids through college or would you rather put your attorney's kids through college? And they look at you and they're kind of a little offended at first. And I said, it's just an honest question because if you do this right and you work through this and you get through this in an organized fashion, it's going to be, 1/100th the cost of using attorneys. And that is a big thing. But the second point is, and again, it sounds a little obnoxious, so forgive me, but, and, and I say this even of my own self and of my own marriage, but when you look across at your spouse, I want you to think of this, think of this as a statement. When you look at that person, think of the absolute absurdity it is that there could be one person on this planet that is your identical, exact, perfect match, right? The mathematics are astronomical. So when you look at that person, you have to say, you know what? This is the person I've chosen. They've chosen me. Let's make it work because I look at my wife and I say this to her and I say this to her face lovingly, of course. I go, you are a crazy person. I don't understand words coming out of your mouth. I love you, but I just need you to know that you are a crazy person. And she's like, well, you are too. And then we laugh because that's a true statement, right? The person you're like, I don't understand what you're talking about here. And then when you take that emotion out of it and you're able to poke fun at yourself and of the absurdity of it all, that two people could find each other and be a perfect match and never argue and everything goes smoothly. That really, I think, adds to the feeling of we can do this because I want to do this because if I divorce you and let's say I remarry someone else, I'm really going to just find myself in the exact same situation. That person is going to have their own issues, their own foibles, their own baggage, and I'm just going to be right back here again. So I'd much rather say, you know what? I've shared history with you. I know you. We've had some good times because, when you're in this kind of situation, everything can feel dire and feel like it's a bad thing. But I think if we do the work and we put in the time, we can make this work. And that's the emphasis I'm trying to put out to clients. I was like, look, it's real easy to say you want a divorce. You can pick up the phone and call me in a blink and we can have your marriage ended in 3 months if you'd like. But if you've been married 20 or 25 or 30 years, maybe it's worth a little bit of time to try to keep it together.
Together.
It's a,
Exactly. Yeah. So for couples who are listening, what is something simple that they can start doing today or right after this conversation that can help them to start negotiating instead of arguing?
yeah. So the one thing I would tell listeners, here's the homework assignment I typically end with. In the next 48 hours, I want you to grab a pad and I want you go to our website. It's powerupmethod.com. And I want you to go there and I want you to think about one conversation that you haven't had that you want to, but for fear that it was going to go sideways, that it was going to go wrong. And on that pad, write down the letters of the power up. And there's a little like on that website, there's like little 1 or 2 sentence definitions of what it is. And then outline that conversation. And it doesn't have to be a master's thesis. It's just a sentence or two. How am I going to prepare the connection? What am I going to say? How much time do I think this can need? Outline your request. Couple of sentences, what I want to talk about, and so on and so forth. And then find the time and have that conversation. Use those steps, practice it, and let your spouse know there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. Haven't known how to bring it up. I heard Dr. Burke talking to this guy, Joe Dillon. I think I've got a way to approach you, basically indulge me. Like, help me here. I know this is going to come across as awkward. I know it's going to sound unusual, but I want you to know that I'm doing this because I seriously want to have this conversation. And if you do that and you map it out on paper, because I'm still a tactile guy, pad and pen guy. I know I have my laptops and tablets, but I also like to write down if something's important, I like to physically write it on a pad and then plan that conversation and have it and see how it goes. And just explain to them I know things have not been going well, and so I want to try a different tactic. Are you open to doing that? And you'd be surprised because most people also know that things aren't going well, and the fact that you acknowledged it and said it out loud is like, huh, so it's not just me? Yeah, you know what? Things could be better around here, and I know I've had a part in it. I want to have a part in resolving that. Let's do this. And so that's what I would say. Give it a shot. It's not going to be easy. You'll both have some laughs, some cry, but practice makes perfect, as my mom would say.
That's a wonderful example to give couples to use right after our conversation. I
Mhm.
want to just ask a question regarding children. So, based on your experience of working with couples who might decide, okay, we're not going to divorce anymore. We've
Mhm.
found through the power up method that we can resolve a lot of the issues that, may have been causing resentment. So how does learning this method or just learning negotiation in general, how does that affect the children and the family systems overall?
Yeah, boy, I could speak to that for hours, but I'll be respectful of our time. Kids are amazing. Kids are sponges, they absorb everything. And as adults, we don't realize, but every behavior, everything we do, we are modeling for our children. So I once was asked a question, and it was one of those, I'll admit it was one of those silly things you see in like a magazine, like one of those gossip magazines. And it was like the 20 questions. And it was your parents' relationship a marriage to emulate or avoid? And then you were supposed to have like a philosophical conversation with your spouse and I was like, oh, avoid 100%. And my mom's like, really? I'm like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer, right? That's an easy one. Thankfully, I was smart enough to know that, yeah, that's not how this should work because I just saw them yelling and screaming and throwing things and pounding and stuff and then not talking to each other for weeks or months. I'm like, this is not this. I don't know much, but I know this isn't right. On the flip side, when kids watch their parents having these respectful conversations and negotiating and giving to get, especially for only children like us,
Yeah.
they see that model and they say, you know what? Okay, I can't always get what I want. I also have to be willing to give something. People can agree to disagree. They can sit down. They can work through it. And kids catch that stuff, man. They really do. And that's where as a peacemaker, right? People, that's the kind of the slang for mediators is peacemakers. I'm not a political person, but if you look at our world and you look at the conflicts going on throughout our world, no matter where you live, there's something going on. And I truly believe that's a product of us not being able to sit down with each other, look at all sides, acknowledge each other's perspective, ask for something, but offer something in return about compromising. And it's sort of like, look where it's gotten us. So not that I'm saying this will cure the world's ills. But I do think that by modeling this in the home and showing kids that adults can have these productive, structured conversations, it's not just all about, screaming and yelling and emotions, that children will be far better off. And I really do believe that. And I hope people take that to heart because you don't know it, but your kids are watching 100%.
I have a question regarding prevention. So we might have couples listening who are like struggling and they're feeling stuck in constant arguing. What is this first sign that you could maybe share that it's still possible to turn things around
Hmm.
and to put divorce and separation in the background or get rid of it altogether? What is a
Yeah.
sign that there's still hope? We are in the thick of it. We don't like each other. We are arguing
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And they might think, okay, this is too much for my mental health. It's not good for the kids. It's best that we just separate or eventually divorce. But is there a first sign that still hold on, you can turn things around?
Well, you actually said it. It's that they're still arguing. The couples who come to me, they stopped arguing. Now they're just not talking anymore because they just don't care. When we argue, I believe argument comes from, many places. Frustration, no question, but emotion. And we're still emotionally engaged with this person. And if there's emotion there, there's still love is underneath that. It's one of the emotions, right? It's buried. Sure, it's like when you haven't washed your automobile for a while. There's still your nice clean car is under there, but we got to get the rag and the hose and we got to wash it off. And what to me that says, Dr. Burke, is that they still care. They're just frustrated. That childlike instinct like we all had as little kids when we couldn't express ourselves. What would we do? We'd scream, we'd stomp, we'd pout, we'd we'd run around, rage around the house and throw our toys and do those things because we all revert back to that child when we're frustrated. And to be able to say, you know what, we're arguing, it's not you, it's not me, it's us, it's a situation, we need some intervention. And that's where I find, getting a couple into counseling and then getting them to kind of clear the decks on those feelings so that they can start using a structured method like mine to have more tactical conversations, because admittedly mine is very structured, it's very results oriented. And therapy, while I think therapy, I'm a huge fan of therapy and couples counseling, it addresses a lot of the emotions, the past, the underlying behaviors which need to be cleared in order for you to now move forward with something like a power up method where you're like, okay, we're going to make the conscious choice now to structure our conversations this way, move forward in this direction. Now that we've gotten the anger or the angst out of the way, or not, we've at least kind of started to work on resolving it, we can now have some wins. And in my mediation practice, in my divorce mediation practice, I'll let it, a little secret. Whenever I see a client couple with children, the first thing I always do is the parenting plan. Because in my entire history, I've never had a client couple come to me and say, no, Joe, actually, we don't like our kids. We don't want the best for them. They're terrible children. You know what? You can have them. Right? They're always very protective and, oh, we love our kids. Our kids are great, aren't they? Oh yeah. So I've got them now. I hooked them because I've connected them as parents. And then we get agreement on the parenting plan, which usually happens, almost a majority of, 100% of the time. And I go, look at you guys getting along. Look at you guys coming to agreement. Wow, good job. And then they kind of look at each other and like, yeah, we did good, didn't we? I'm like, you did great. Good job. And that gives them some confidence to get into the tough stuff like the child support, the property division, and the alimony, and all the hard ones that are coming down the pipe. But by doing that, you see, you get that small win. In this case, clear the emotions, get a small win, use the power up structure to where do we want to? A good one that I'll use, and I'll leave this as a good example, is date night, right? Let's go out as a couple. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I don't want to do this. All right. I say, okay. So using power up, I would say, okay, we're going to do dinner and a movie. I'm going to pick the place we eat. You pick the movie. And you stay quiet because, like, for example, my wife and I, when we do this kind of stuff, I happen to be a fan of Indian food, Thai food, exotic things. She's more of a plain, steak, hamburger, maybe pasta, like real plain eater. And then me, I'm, comedy, action adventure movie, and she's more like drama, romance, right? So immediately our date night is set up for disaster, right? But I'm like, listen, if we go to that new Thai restaurant that I want to go, we'll go see Wuthering Heights and we'll go, and I promise I won't go throughout the movie. And, I promise I'll be engaged and I'll get you popcorn and, and we'll do something. So you see, even just in simple everyday interactions like that, you can use that. You don't have to go through the whole methodology. You just can reward with value, have an ask, reward with value. And then you go, oh, hey, yeah, I know. Look, I know you hate Thai food, but I've really been wanting to try this place. I'll tell you what, if we can go to this new restaurant, you can pick the movie. How's that sound? That's the compressed, you know, Q-E-R, I guess, in the middle of it, right?
I have one question. I was just thinking, this is wonderful for couples, and we might have parents who are already divorced. Can this power up method work with co-parenting?
Mm, that's a good question. It could. I could see,
Like,
yeah, I could see that, right? Because, for example, it's common to, in a divorce agreement here in the United States or anywhere, is to have a holiday plan. So where will the children spend on particular holidays? Because that's the sad thing, right? You always want your family and your kids with you on a holiday. It's a special day. But because now you've separated households, the chances are one of you is going to go without seeing the kids. And usually it's common alternating every other year, right? Odd, even, odd, even. So it could be something where the ask might be, I'd like to switch holidays. And I realize that I'm asking to take the kids for Christmas. And I know I also had them last year. But if you give me this holiday, I'll give you, maybe I'll give you two holidays in exchange, right? I'm really rewarding with value, something that's going to really kind of really hurt to give, but I'm going to give it because I acknowledge it. So, yeah, certainly you could use it in those kind of limited, situations. You've probably lost a little bit of the connection, right, of the
right.
the partnership per se. But I think the important point is, as we've been talking about, is really acknowledging, expressing the why, weighing their perspective, knowing that it's going to be really hard, and then rewarding them with something that gives that as much or more value than you're asking for. So yeah, I certainly could see it working that way.
Okay, wonderful. So my final question is, what would you want a couple to remember about their marriage after hearing that every marriage is a negotiation?
Yeah. Wow. Oh boy, that's a good question. Boy, I gotta think of it. I guess it's sort of like I kind of say with the website. It's like most couples know how to argue, few know how to negotiate. And don't beat yourself up over it. I I've been trained at some of the best institutions and been doing this in corporations and with individuals for the better part of 30 years. Of course, I know how to do this. Don't beat yourself up. It's learning. Learn it together. Have fun. Poke fun at yourselves. Do as I was telling you before, how my wife and I do it. And we make it silly. We make it like almost like a joke, but we know how serious it is underneath. And so if you're willing to do that and kind of have some fun with it, that's what I would say is that our marriage is worth keeping. It's worth saving. I find a lot of marriages are. There's a lot of good. I must say that there are a lot of clients that I, close the office down for the day and I, sit at the dinner table and Charles like, how was your day? And I'm like, I can't figure these two out. I don't know why they're getting divorced. And then she's politely reminds me everyone's on their own journey and her background psychology. So she's like, you have to right get out of the way and she's right 100%. But he says, hey, you know what? Give it a shot. What's the worst that happens? You stay together. And then the alternative is you go and do what you thought you were going to do anyway and get a divorce, right? But if you give it a shot, and you make it a little silly, then suddenly it builds up. And to put the finance analogy on it, given that I have a master's in finance, is I say, look, when we first started out of school and we were told that we have to start saving money for our retirement, we didn't in our very first job put away all the money we'll ever need once we stop working. We put in maybe $25. We put in then again next week, then next week. And that bank, I call it the marriage bank, builds up over time. And all those little things that you do for your partner, they start to add up. So when you come in and ask about that guy's weekend or that spa weekend, or you want to go to the movie or this or that, the person can look at you and go, all right. He's got a really high balance in his marriage bank with me because he's taken the kids and he's walked the dog and he's he's picked my mother up from the airport and spent time with her when I didn't want to be in the same room with her, And so you know what? He can go have his guy's weekend, right? And that's what you have to remember. These deposits compound over time.
Yeah, wonderful. I love the power up. So I just want to repeat for the listeners, P, prepare the connection, outline the request, weigh their perspective, share their perspective, express your why, and reward with value. The
Very
last one is
good.
really good.
Yeah.
Reward with value. So, for the listeners who might be like, wow, I need to read some more, what's the publication date of your book and all your social media handles and website for people who would love to work with you?
Yeah, certainly. So the book is probably coming out in about a year because I was very sad to learn this. It takes a very long time to write and publish a book. So I have newfound respect for all the authors. I'm an avid reader. I read about a book or two a week. And now I'm going to slow down because I want to be respectful of the time it took them to write this.
So
So I will
a year from now, we can have a second conversation about the book.
absolutely. And I'd say the best place to find me is that website, thepowerupmethod.com. You can also go to the Joe Dillon. So like the Joe Dillon is spelled like my name, JoeDillon.com. And that's all my social media. So on Facebook, I'm the Joe Dillon. On Instagram, the Joe Dillon. I'm on LinkedIn. And I'd love to connect with people. If you've heard this, if it's resonated with you, you can sign up for a weekly newsletter on thepowerupmethod.com. And then I'm going to send you the first chapter of the book when it comes out. And, I'm starting to, put together speaking engagements. Haven't gotten that all fleshed out yet, but, certainly more to come because I do believe I've been fortunate to be married for 21 years, most of them very happily, but that's been by choice, not by happenstance. And my wife is probably very lucky that I'm a professional negotiator because sometimes, Dr. Burke, I find myself having both sides of the conversation. And that can happen too, by the way. That's okay.
Your wife is a pretty lucky lady to have you as
I will let
husband.
her know that.
Thank you so much for sharing your method with us because,
Thank
again,
you.
I think this is such a wonderful resource to help to keep couples happily together, which then impacts the family dynamics and children and just keep the family together in general. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Joe.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.